C 426. Chapter 113. The Twins of Desire _ 2. The goddess of beauty, Aphrodite, was originally married not to the war god in mythology, but to the smith god Hephaestus. However, the nature granted by her godhood made her unwilling to be bound by marriage, and her husband's ugliness and disability intensified her aversion. So quite naturally, she secretly sought her own love, and the handsome and robust Aries naturally became one of her most frequent clandestine lovers. In this process, their illegitimate child, the little god of love who likewise left behind many legends, seemed to have some connection with that primordial deity from the creation of the world. He too was known as Eros in mythology and had authority related to desire, making it hard to believe there was no relation between them. Of course, apart from being called Eros, he had another name well known, bestowed upon him by the Romans, Cupid. Laine did not know if, without his presence, this little god of love who shared the same name and surname as the primordial deity had anything remarkable about him or had any profound secrets, but no matter whether they were originally connected or not, now all he had to do was to make them connected. Moreover, in the field of the mystical studies, a name itself carries a very distinct individual trace, and having the same name naturally can carry a similar fate. So looking at the surging mouth of the well, Laine pressed down his hand. Click. In silence, something illusory was cut off and then pieced together, and at the bottom of the well of reincarnation, the breath of life became more and more distinct. The divine being that had died before being born was there, and today, he was going to be reborn. That night, atop Mount Olympus. The happenings in the spirit realm had not made their way here, quite the opposite. In fact, the so-called opportunity that Laine was waiting for had appeared precisely because of the changes here. Everything needed a catalyst to align with the existing destiny of the current world, and then there was room for various manipulations. And the prelude to all this had to be attributed to the first tryst of two deities on Mount of the Gods. Hundreds of years had passed, and on Mount Olympus, the abodes of the gods had long resumed their old views. Under the illumination of stars and the moon, they twinkled in various hues, adorned by the different dominions of the temple owners, decorating the pillars upholding the heavens. Near the middle of the mountain, a vast sea of flowers spread across the flat ground. Roses, pomegranate, and gillyflower bloomed in succession, surrounding a small and exquisite temple. On its pristine columns were carved waves and foam, the detailed frieze seemingly hinting at the birthplace of its owner. Without a doubt, this was the temple of Aphrodite, the embodiment of love and beauty. More than one deity had praised that the most beautiful flower naturally should be guarded by a host of blossoms. Hence, outside her temple was this dazzling sea. However, at this moment, bursts of intense panting and colliding sounds came from inside the temple, disrupting the serene and lovely atmosphere of the place. Under the dim and ambiguous light, clothes were tossed about in disarray. In the center of the large bed, two figures were entangled, wildly venting the primordial impulses of deities. Although this palace had seen the stay of more than one deity in the past years, this time, Aphrodite finally thought of Aries, whom she had not yet wed. Although he had not yet reached the pinnacle of godhood, the war god was still a war god. He possessed extraordinary strength, inherently granted by his godhood. Considering this, Aphrodite did not mind giving him a taste of sweetness in advance. However, today's experience was destined to disappoint the goddess of beauty, for the tumbling on the bed had not lasted long when the war god suddenly stiffened. The handsome and burly deity seemed to sense something through his spiritual sense, yet he couldn't pinpoint the problem. This instinctively put him on alert, yet looking around, there was nothing that warranted such caution. Aries, what's wrong? Noticing something off with the person on top of her, the goddess of beauty didn't take it seriously, she simply stretched lazily. For a moment, the seduction of femininity was fully displayed by her, but to Aphrodite's surprise, Aries still showed no reaction. But that shouldn't be the case. No matter how you looked at it, the fit and muscular Aries should not have reacted this way. For a moment, she even began to doubt her charm. Aphro, it's nothing, I just had a bit of a bad premonition. Seemingly noticing the unusual look in Aphrodite's eyes, Aries hurriedly explained. In front of him, whether she believed him or not, Aphrodite simply shifted her gaze and silently moved her belt. Even though it wasn't worn on her body, as the inherent owner of the divine artifact, Aphrodite still borrowed a bit of its power. In an instant, her charm was magnified once again on top of its original realm. Languishing on the bed, the goddess of beauty closed her eyes. She had used her divine artifact more than once and thus knew of its effects. When exerted fully, even the current divine king would be captivated by her, let alone the war god who currently possessed intermediate divine power. She was ready to be pounced on, but to her surprise again, after waiting left and right, even when she couldn't wait any longer and opened her eyes, Aphrodite only saw the war god's embarrassed expression. Clearly, perhaps it was a forewarning on the level of fate that was too strong, causing Aries to remain in a state of stress. While this was the war god's sharpest intuition, it now rendered him unable to muster interest in the Aphrodite before him. C. 427. Chapter 113. The Twins of Desire _3. If it were any other time, this might not pose a problem. Perhaps Aphrodite would even take a liking to him for resisting her charm with sheer willpower, for not every deity can do so. But now, things were different. Aries. Aphrodite. Bang. In the dark of night, following a muffled sound, Aries tumbled out of the goddess of beauty's palace. He rose from the cold floor and was about to say something when a pile of clothes thrown from behind the door hit his face. The doors then shut firmly, as if its mistress no longer wished to lay eyes on this loathsome fellow. And though the war god was typically quick to anger, he found he could not muster any rage at this sight. This was his and Aphrodite's first private encounter, and he had not anticipated such a turn of events. For a moment, Aries began to doubt himself, wondering if there was something wrong with his own body that had led to this situation. Of course, the war god could not come up with an answer, but with things as they were, he had no choice but to gloomily dress himself and walk towards his own palace. At this time, Aries was unaware that inside the tightly sealed palace, the goddess of beauty was grinding her teeth in frustration. Tall and handsome he may be, she thought, but in actuality, he is all show and no substance, always so quick to make excuses. In that moment, Aphrodite, who had been quite content with their marriage, began to consider other prospects. It was a different beginning but the same conclusion. Even though the suitor of her original fate had become her husband, it seemed that the fate of the goddess of beauty remained unaltered. In the spirit realm, before the well of reincarnation, Laine was clearly unaware of everything happening on Mount Olympus. He had only sensed the fate fluctuations from the birth of the little god of love, seized this opportune moment, rather than actively observing the events on Mount Olympus. He could never have anticipated that his actions would be detected by the war god's battle instincts. Detecting shifts in fate or having a clear premonition without the appropriate authority, these are feats normally within the reach of great divine power. Had Laine known of Ares's experiences that day, he might have been amused, while acknowledging the strength of the other's godhood. Although Ares may not always come out as the victor in myths, it is mainly because his opponents are stronger. As far as godhood is concerned, Ares is actually considered one of the most powerful deities, even if his aspect of war is inclined towards personal brutality and injustice. But those were idle thoughts. Now, observing the water in the well which seemed to be boiling, Laine nodded to himself. After returning from the 9 realms, he had brought back some dragon eggs. Most of them had hatched by now, except for the very first time dragon which had yet to emerge. The reason Laine had chosen time over order and samsara initially was precisely because the former two did not quite fit. Order was not unique to the spirit realm, and samsara was dismissed because of the very being that was at this moment gradually reincarnating. Otherwise, birthing a time dragon seemed to be a perfectly reasonable option. C3 to 59. But something is still missing. It has fate, it has spirituality, yet it also needs substance to serve as its vessel. Fortunately, my previous preparations have finally come into use. Nodding slightly, Laine extended his hand, and a clot of blood that had been forgotten for an era flew out of a palace where treasures were stored, crossed spatial barriers, and landed in his palm. C2 to 11. It was the blood of Uranus. Keto, once the dangerous creature of the sea, later transformed into a goddess embracing false beauty using it. But that transformation had been an unintended consequence of Laine's action. His true intent had been to claim the blood which later gave birth to the 3 Furies and Aphrodite. At that time, Laine was unaware that the death of Eros began with him, but that did not prevent him from noting the shared name between the little god of love and the primordial deity, based on future memories. Hence, as a precaution, Laine took a scoop of the blood and kept it until today, and now finally, it had found its use. This blood, originating from the same source as Aphrodite, easily replaced the goddess of beauty's place in fate. With it as a material, it was enough to serve as another kind of matrix for Eros's rebirth. Go on, this is most fitting for you. With a flick of his finger, the vial carrying the blood shattered upon impact, falling into the churning well below, initiating an even more intense transformation. Standing at the edge of the well, Laine watched the scene unfold quietly. Enter this world, and then ask him for recompense. Since desire has collapsed, let something else serve as the proof of your birth. C. 428. Chapter 114 Arrows and Gifts. The small vial shattered, and the blood foam of the former Heavenly Father fell into the well water, instantly stirring up 1,000 ripples. Deep beneath the well of reincarnation, intertwined destinies and gradually converging consciousness seemed to have found an object to cling to. They immediately surged towards the direction of the divine blood, merging with it and undergoing a metamorphosis. Thus, beneath the bicolored water surface, a massive cocoon of light slowly took shape. It greedily absorbed the surrounding energy, transforming it into nourishment for growth, as the breath of life within grew increasingly more intense. Meanwhile, during the formation of the light cocoon, two streams of light emerged from nowhere, circling indecisively to its left and right. Their auras interlinked and transformed into each other, tending towards a singular entity, that was none other than the two segments of the divine lance Gingnir. In the past, Laine had split the lance, which had absorbed the vitality of the world tree roots, into 3 parts. The middle section inherited the aspect of oath, while the two sides bore the power of certainty. He cast them into the well of reincarnation, hoping they would be fully utilized to become an extraordinary divine artifact. Now, they were evidently influenced by the birth of the new deity, drawn to it and becoming its accompanying entities. As time ticked by, the light cocoon swelled even more, and faintly, the sound of a heartbeat began to emanate from within. At the same time, feeling the increasing suction force, Laine spared no effort in infusing various powers into it. It was not only pure energy but also an array of memories and faith related to specific emotions. With their infusion, the aura emitted from the light cocoon grew more unique, even causing the nearby souls, cleansed of memories and awaiting reincarnation, to be affected and stir slightly. However, these souls were swiftly subdued by the guards surrounding them. These beings summoned by the 3 goddesses of reincarnation, although somewhat affected, maintained their autonomy under the protection of divine power and upheld their duties. Let them back off, this influence will only get more intense. In a while, even your divine power won't protect them. Seeing this, Laine instructed Uranus, who immediately executed the order. As for this special influence, Laine could have forcibly stopped it, but considering it involved the birth of a new deity, it was better to let nature take its course. Soon, the area around the well of reincarnation cleared. Standing on the well's edge, Laine continued to await the birth of the deity. The bicolored well water at the core began to spin faster and faster, even forming a vortex at one point, relentlessly swallowing everything around it. As energy accumulated, rather than growing, the core cocoon shrank. At one moment, when the swallowing of external matter reached its peak, the well water's vortex suddenly stilled for an instant, then burst forth tumultuously, stirring up towering waves. Accompanied by a crisp crackling sound, the light cocoon shattered. An endless flood of light poured out, illuminating every corner of the 4th layer of the spirit realm. Desire twins. Volos, Eros. The new deity was born, and its true name resounded, but just as Laine had anticipated, it did not cause any world-altering phenomena. Even the newborn deity didn't appear powerful, but rather exceptionally weak. In the world's conception, the former primordial deity was already dead, and its innately held authority had long since scattered. Even reborn, it was destined not to reclaim them. Aside from retaining a few traits of the primordial gods, which made some of her powers nearly exempt from anything less than great divine power, the new deity was merely a true god, not even reaching intermediate divine power. However, at this moment, observing the figure that leapt out from the cocoon, Laine's lips twitched slightly. What is this situation? How did the mythological little god of love split into 2? Although he did not voice it out loud, looking at the boy and girl before him, both about 11 or 12 years of age and each wielding a miniature bow, Laine was a bit baffled by the logic behind it. Perhaps there was some issue between the destiny he manually grafted and the original mythology, or perhaps the nature of reincarnation was such, or maybe there was something in the blood foam used to shape their bodies. The blood he took contained not only Aphrodite's image but also a part of the 3 Furies. After all, they had not yet been born when Laine arrived. Indeed, the blood of Uranus could give birth to deities, but it was not without aim but took place when the spilled blood matched certain opportunities or concepts. The 3 Furies matched his hatred towards his offspring and Mother Earth, and Aphrodite, naturally, had to do with his desire. Even Laine had once wondered whether the intense desire of the Heavenly Father was influenced by the scattered authority of the primordial deity throughout heaven and earth, and the fact that the mythical little god of love was nurtured by the goddess of beauty was yet another manifestation of this influence. It was due to the influence of the primordial deity that the Heavenly Father's divine blood could give birth to the goddess of beauty. Conversely, the offspring of the goddess of beauty likewise seemed to become the vessel for the primordial deity. The current world shuns greatness, and the mythological Eros was even less visible than other primordial gods. If it wasn't for Laine's arrival leading to its premature demise, then it indeed might have chosen to descend in such a way, avoiding the world's constraints. C. 429. Chapter 114 Eros and Gifts _2. So under these circumstances, it seems reasonable that an accident might occur with the birth of new gods. But the problem Laine must now face is, since there are two gods, whom should retrieve the concept of winter? Looking at the two new gods with their baffled eyes open, Laine couldn't help but focus on the miniature bow behind them. The bow itself was ordinary, and although it was a rare treasure for ordinary people, it didn't have much effect on truly powerful deities. What really attracted him were the arrows that came with each bow. One was a golden arrow, and the other was a lead arrow, with each new god holding one. From a higher perspective, conceptual forces swirled around them. This was the last manifestation of the power of the primordial deities, thus endowing them with a mysterious force. Laine could feel that these two arrows could not be used lightly, they needed certain conditions to be met, but once shot, the consequences would be unimaginable. Well, if that's the case, then let the person involved choose for themselves. Making a silent decision, since he couldn't make the choice himself, he decided to let others choose instead. Now, Laine planned to first introduce these two new gods to the world. Whether as a part of the past of the primordial deities or in their newly gained present, they undoubtedly had never understood this world. Before seeking their own rewards, it would be better to first understand the current state of the world. Moreover, as the lord of the spirit realm, Laine had a premonition that these two new gods were probably not the type to stay in line. The mortal realm, Eros' royal palace. The night had deepened, and beneath the glorious starry night, the palace shimmered with scattered lights. The weather was growing increasingly cold, with a thin layer of frost forming on the streets, rendering the entire city exceptionally quiet. Inside the residence of the former king, the old woman that Demeter had transformed into was sitting at the table, flipping through an extremely rare scroll from the kingdom. These crystallizations of wisdom were undoubtedly of extraordinary value to the human kingdom, and the king had evidently not refused Moira's request for them. Reading by the light of the lamp, in fact, most of the content recorded in the scrolls was incomprehensible to the goddess. So, those related to weaving and casting were often hastily overlooked by her. Only parts involving the cultivation of agriculture prompted a proud smile from her, and then she would mark them with her pen. Of course, Demeter didn't actually understand agriculture. Being the goddess of all things growing, she could deduce the process from the results. Though she did not know why one way was correct and another wrong, with just a gentle tap of her scepter, the laws would tell her how to make the plants grow better. She recorded these things, which were also the gifts Demeter planned to give to this human kingdom as a reward for sheltering her. After all, strictly speaking, the Eros king had made a very good impression on the goddess. Therefore, she was willing to give this reward, and incidentally, spread her faith. The goddess had stayed in this human nation for quite a while, for unlike Laine, and beyond the three goddesses in charge of spring, summer, and autumn, even though the concept of winter converged because of Demeter, she herself was oddly unaware of this. Thus, the goddess disguised as a mortal waited for the reaction of the gods while maintaining her flawed disguise, pretending to be an old woman who, due to an accident, had ended up in a foreign land and then came to the royal palace to make a living. It was quite evident that, unlike Demeter's nonchalance, Clitus, who faintly sensed the identity of the visitor, did not dare to treat her as an ordinary person. This promising king did not disturb Demeter's enthusiasm, displaying kindness and affability and fulfilling what a sovereign ought to do. He complied with the goddess's desires and arranged a servant's role for her. Of course, he did not dare to truly command this mysterious guest, so unbeknownst to the goddess, the entire Eros palace was thus bustling. Consequently, Demeter suddenly found her life to be more fulfilling than ever before, even if, disregarding the simplicity of the material aspects, this place without the presence of Zeus made her feel more at ease. For big and small matters, as long as she expressed her opinion, it would quickly elicit agreement from everyone and be executed swiftly. A mere frown would bring kind souls to fuss over her, fearing that this foreigner did not feel the warmth of the Eros kingdom. For a time, the goddess disguised as Moira felt extraordinarily content, and if not for her concern for her daughter, she would not want to leave at all. During her life here, the goddess even developed a strange yet reasonable thought. No wonder the foresighted Prometheus enjoyed living with humans so much that he committed such a grand sin. It was entirely understandable. For if the life of a mortal maid brought more joy than that of a deity's servant, then as the creator of bronze humanity, the pleasures Prometheus might experience could possibly surpass even those of the divine king. And so the days passed by one after the other, and Demeter naturally indulged in the life of a mortal maid. Until one evening at dinner, when she saw the child in Queen Metanira's arms, she was once again reminded of her own daughter, who had been taken to the underworld. C 430. Chapter 114 Eros and Gifts _3. King of Eryxis, perhaps I can take care of your son. I once had a child myself, so I am quite experienced in this. After dinner, Demeter expressed her thoughts directly as she had done every time in the past. And, as expected, Clitus suppressed his inner surprise and swiftly agreed to her proposal. The king thought his investment was finally paying off. Even though it was not exactly what he had desired, the response from a seeming deity was not something he could control. Thus, Clitus handed over the swaddled infant Demephon to the goddess. At that moment, he even decided that his second son would be the future king of Eryxis. Then, thank you, Moira. It's nothing. I quite like him, too. As she took the prince and looked at the baby's smiling face, Demeter felt the void in her heart being filled. Once, to protect her daughter from the poison of the other deities, she and Persephone had often been apart. But now, looking at Demephon in her arms, she experienced a different kind of joy. And for a moment, the goddess entertained a thought. This was a boy. He would not suffer the same calamity as she and her daughter did. He would not be noticed by the gods, and his original parents were merely mortals after all. Perhaps Demephon could stay by her side for a long time, just like her own child. And the prerequisite for this to happen was granting him eternal life. Almost there. 2 brothers, one to reign as a mortal king, to become a divine practitioner of my worship. The other to be my foster son, and live eternally with me. Such a gift should suffice to repay their hospitality. Her thoughts returning, Demeter put down the scroll she was holding and glanced at the sky outside. It was nearly midnight, and she couldn't help but stand and walk outside. To grant a mortal eternal life was not difficult. By parting with a fragment of her own divine power, the goddess could easily achieve it. But to additionally grant Demephon immortality was not so straightforward. The previous god wars made Demeter realize that simply having life wasn't enough, like those nymphs who served the deities, many of whom had perished unexpectedly in various disasters. Therefore, if she did not want to witness her foster son die in front of her one day, the goddess had to find a way to give this mortal prince a body as difficult to harm as that of the gods. It was not a simple task, but fortunately, Demeter was not only the goddess of fertility. She was also the sister of the goddess of fire and guardianship. The goddess knew that Hestia would not refuse her request to borrow her power, and with the help of the goddess of hearthfire, Demeter could bestow upon the child a divine body immune to harm. So, just like every night recently, she left the room and took the swaddled prince back to her bedside. She placed Demephon on the hearth, pressed her right hand on his heart, and then softly chanted the hymn of the goddess of hearthfire. Immortal of Olympus, Hestia O. Sacred Hestia, I will praise your name aloud. Mighty daughter of Cronus, holy deity, fruitful daughter of Rhea O. Guardian of the sacred fire. You are the glory and the pure flame. Guardian of peace. Oh, glorious goddess, please, listen to my song. Grant me your power. Please, care for this child in my presence as you have cared for me. As the low chant ended, the flames in the hearth in front of Demeter suddenly flared. The nature of the fire was altered, and no ritual of mortals was needed, for a deity's prayer itself was a sufficiently high ritual. Within the blazing sacrificial fire, a mysterious power was being infused into Demephon's body. Every bit of flesh that was scorched by the flame was endowed with the concept of guardianship, and henceforth, it would be difficult for the forces of this world to harm him. This was a blessing from the goddess of protection. The act was bound to be long and dangerous, however, for the protective power of the fire did not mean that it was without peril in itself. The stronger the granted guardianship, the greater the harm it would cause to the recipient. It could even reduce the recipient to ashes before bestowing upon him the power, but the goddess had foreseen this. Each day, she would anoint the infant with holy food imbued with her power. By night, she would personally guide the growth of that power against the flames. In this way, under the intersection of the powers of two mighty divine realms, the dangers were avoided and only the benefits remained. With a smile, Demeter watched the child in the fire, more and more satisfied. From this day forward, he was her child. And as a scion of the Lady of Plenty, he naturally deserved such glory. Do not hurry. Soon, very soon, you shall enjoy immortality and eternal life. This is the light and glory you will receive as my foster son, as Demeter's child. Your father and brothers will eventually age, but you shall live as I do. The deep voice echoed in the room, as if a complex incantation. At this moment, the goddess was fully focused on guiding the power of the sacred food. Only the perfect is worthy of her status, therefore, this child must also be made perfect. C. 431. Chapter 115. God's Mercy. Time slipped by, turning into months in the blink of an eye. The weather grew colder, and the situation in Eryxis's kingdom became increasingly difficult, but none of this affected Demeter in the palace, whose life remained as usual. Although the stores of food were running low, King Cleus, even while reducing his own expenses, did not cut back on Moira's meals, so the goddess noticed no particular changes. In such times, she didn't need to worry about any troubling matters. Demeter simply followed her own rhythm, applying the sacred food to the little prince during the day and burning him with ritual fire at night. The flames consumed Demophane's original flesh and bones, and the vitality brought by the sacred food allowed new ones to grow continuously. The goddess's ritual was going very smoothly. Apart from causing her some fatigue, there was nothing undesirable. This day was the same. The prince slept soundly, bathed in flames, and felt no pain at all. Next to him, Demeter concentrated on baptizing his body. The night was deep, and silence reigned in the palace, with only the crackling sound of the sacrificial fire burning continuously inside the room. Everything was as usual. Until a moment later, a knocking sound came from near the door. Dong dong. Dong dong dong. Moira, are you there? The soft sound of knocking rose, distinctly heard in the quiet room. That was Queen Mnemosyne's voice. Her tone was a bit tense, somewhat urgent, but she still did not speak loudly. She hoped to receive some response, yet after a good while, the room remained silent without any other sounds coming through. Having focused her mind on the little prince, Demeter paid no attention to the visitor and continued her work. Most of the flesh and bones had already been replaced, and there was not much left. Today's target of the ritual fire was Demophane's still tender cheeks. The goddess's fingers gently traced his face, and mysterious transformations ensued. From then on, the forces of this world could no longer harm him, and even the influence of divine power would be greatly reduced, no longer able to kill him easily. Outside the hut, Mnemosyne hesitated, filled with concern. The light shone from the wooden hut, indicating that its inhabitant was probably not asleep yet. But in response to her call, there was no feedback from inside. The queen didn't know the identity of the person inside, or rather, even her husband, King Cleus's understanding of Moira's identity was merely a guess. However, as the most powerful warrior of Eryxis, the fact that he detected nothing unusual about her presence meant she must be far from ordinary, so he repeatedly warned everyone inside the palace not to disturb her lightly. Mnemosyne's husband's caution made her aware of Demeter's distinction, so in theory, she should not have disturbed this mysterious presence in the middle of the night, but today was an exception. Not long before, having awakened from sleep, the queen suddenly missed her child. She went to Demophane's usual room to visit her son, whom she hadn't seen for a long time, but obviously, it was empty. Just like every night in the past few months, the goddess had already taken him away, leaving behind only the small wooden bed. Mnemosyne was somewhat panicked, not knowing where Demophane was at the moment. But she quickly remembered that her son was left in the care of that mysterious guest by her husband. So when the hurried queen saw the bright light of the fire inside the hut, her heart was somewhat relieved. Perhaps he was just taken to her room by Moira. After all, it was impossible for outsiders to intrude into the palace, and they had no enemies outside. But even so, Mnemosyne still knocked on the door. Just a quick check, and she could apologize sincerely afterward. Thinking this, the queen stood at the door and knocked on the wooden door again. Dong dong. Dong dong dong. Moira, are you there? Quote. Moira, is Demophane with you? But there was no response. It was as if the room was empty. Quote. Moira, if you're there, if it's not convenient for you to let me in, please just respond. Mnemosyne asked again, but still, there was no answer from the room. Beneath the night sky, aside from the rustling wind, there was only the faint sound of the fire burning. After asking several times and receiving no response, the queen hesitated for a long while. Her longing for her son finally overcame her, and with the squeak of the wooden hinges, she pushed the door open. She cautiously entered, surveying the scene, and almost immediately, Demeter, standing in front of the stove, was discovered by her. Ah, Moira, so you're here. Relieved, it was fine as long as she hadn't gone to bed. Mnemosyne took a few steps forward, smiling as she asked, Moira, why didn't you respond just now? I thought, quote. Ah. In the starlight-shrouded city of Eros, a sharp scream tore through the quiet palace, and almost at the next moment, lights were lit one after another. The guards were startled awake, and those who were still on patrol immediately set out. They didn't know what had happened, but the queen seemed to be in danger. In the depths of the palace, on hearing his wife's piercing and desperate voice, King Cleus also suddenly stood up from his desk. This mighty warrior instinctively drew his bronze sword, but in the next moment, he froze in place. C. 432. Chapter 115. Gods, Mercy, _2. The king, already on the brink of legend, easily determined that the source of the voice was inside the palace, and not far off. That place was where the presence suspected to be a deity resided. In an instant, a myriad of emotions flashed through his heart. He wanted to draw his sword and charge ahead without regard for anything else, but various old rumors surfaced one by one. Cleus didn't understand why things had turned out this way, nor why the queen had provoked that mysterious being, but if it truly was a deity, then the consequences of angering her could very well be the destruction of the entire city-state. The king began to hesitate, feeling as if he had a 10,000-pound weight on his back. As the son of the first city founder, and one who had followed his father to establish a new city, Cleus didn't care much about his own life and death, but if his death was not only useless but would also cause greater disasters, the courage to draw his sword suddenly retreated from his heart. Moreover, he had 2 sons and 4 daughters, which left the king in great turmoil. However, before he could truly make a decision, the next moment, a terrible might burst forth again from the place the voice had come from. The immense pressure covered the entire palace, causing the guards patrolling various areas to stop in their tracks. Feeling that overpowering presence, which he absolutely could not contend with, the king clenched his teeth and walked towards that direction. Now, he was the only person in the palace who could still move freely. Bearing the terrifying oppression, Cleus moved forward. He had to find out what happened, no matter the outcome, whether good or bad. Crackle. Crackle. In the room, the goddess's hand was on the infant's face. The tiny sounds of the fuel bursting in the fire seemed to continually echo in her ears, like a rhythmless melody. But it was always like this, and Demeter had long grown used to it. Even when she thought she heard some other noise, she didn't pay much attention. The mortal realm was just the mortal realm. No matter what happened here, it was of no concern to the goddess. Now, to her, completing the baptism of Demeter was key. The pleasantness of her past life made her feel that no one would come to disturb her. It seemed it wouldn't take long, just a few more days, and this mortal's offspring would attain immortality, henceforth existing alongside the divine. Crackle. Ah! Suddenly, a sharp cry pierced her ears, and the goddess, who had been fully engrossed, woke up with a start. The intense emotion contained in that voice startled Demeter momentarily, and her hand involuntarily flinched, causing the protective force around the little prince to retract as well. Then, the next moment, a loud wail echoed throughout the room. Wah! Even if it was just for an instant, the pain from the sacrificial fire had awoken the infant from his sleep. He began to cry loudly, expressing his discontent, and at the same time, the queen realized that her child was still alive. Her eyes wide with shock, the queen rushed forward as if she had forgotten the threat of the flames. She picked up Demeter from the fire. Feeling the normal texture of the infant's skin in her arms, and his loud crying, Mnemosyne finally breathed a sigh of relief, and only then did she turn to look at Demeter beside her. The queen realized that perhaps the other wasn't attempting to harm Demeter, but instead was doing something else, something she didn't understand. Perhaps this wasn't a bad thing. Thinking this, she aimed to justify her impulsive action. But as Mnemosyne looked up, she was met with a pair of ice-cold, indifferent eyes. In that moment, the queen felt as if she wasn't being looked at as a person, but rather as a blade of grass, a pebble. She wanted to say something, but the other spoke first. Mortal, do you know what you've done? Coming back to her senses from the alarming change, Demeter spoke calmly within the room. But facing her, the queen frantically tried to explain. Quote. Moira, I didn't mean to, I just. You've disrupted my ritual, mortal. His face will now bear a never-fading mark, just like a criminal. She spoke calmly, but a boundless rage rose from within her, not for the little prince, but from another source. At that moment, Demeter suddenly realized that she might not like this child that much. She was puzzled as to why she felt this way, but as she spoke, watching Mnemosyne's reaction, the goddess understood something. Hearing Demeter's words, the queen's face showed no disdain, although somewhat regretful. She wouldn't let it change her affection for Mnemosyne, but it was different for the goddess. She liked the child, but only if it was a flawless, perfect offspring nurtured by her. It was a transference of her longing for her daughter and a reflection of her jealousy towards Leto, the goddess of nursery, and her son. Without powerful strength, and even driven to desperation by Hera, Apollo still turned out so excellent. By comparison, Demeter could only make her daughter hide and seek refuge, and in the end, she couldn't escape death. He was just a mortal. Even if a prince, what was so special about him to a deity? He merely appeared before the fertility goddess at the right time and thus received her affection. But he was never irreplaceable, especially at this moment, when the masterpiece that should have been perfect showed a flaw. C. 433. Chapter 115. Gods, Mercy, _3. The goddess had never experienced the games of later generations. She would not know how frustrating and dissatisfied a person who was about to perfectly complete a level would feel in the face of a low-level mistake. She only knew how much energy she had invested before and how intense her desire for destruction was now. Sorry, Moira, I didn't know you were doing this for him. Enough. In front of Demeter, Mnemosyne still wanted to explain, but the goddess no longer wished to listen. The queen's voice only caused her annoyance. The more she cared for the child, the more it made the goddess realize that the other was a mother, whereas she was not. So the game of pretense ended here. Since it was no longer perfect, it had no reason to exist. The next moment, sacred power that had reached a demigod's realm burst forth, instantly enveloping the entire Eroxis. The lamps that had just been lit were suddenly snuffed out, and as she watched a queen overwhelmed and brought to the ground, Demeter's appearance began to change. Age receded, youth returned. Luxurious ornaments adorned her, and the attire of the gods replaced that of mortals. At this moment, the true form of the goddess was so dazzling and so noble and untouchable. However, in the eyes of Clitus, who had finally arrived outside the door, the goddess revealing her true form was terrifying. The pressure from the essence of life caused him to feel fear, but the king still stepped forward, trying to calm her rage. Your Highness, I am Demeter. The king was interrupted, and facing the two in front of her, the goddess's voice was like eternal frost. I am a principal god of Mount Olympus, the deity that presides over the growth of all things. Foolish mortals, you have made a grave mistake. I could have granted your beloved son immortality, but now, he cannot escape the fate of death. Silently, the vitality within the infant, originally meant to counteract the sacrificial fire, suddenly boiled over. It had been the treasure mortals dreamt of, capable of rejuvenating the old and healing the dying. But now, its power acted like a deadly poison, snatching away Mnemosyne's life in an instant. The baby's cries stopped abruptly, and the queen, who had been pinned to the ground, suddenly widened her eyes. She brought her cheek close to her young son's face, but now, he was devoid of life. No. A piercing cry once again rang out in the palace, yet this time, the goddess did not even glance at her. The boon bestowed upon Mnemosyne had come at a whim, and so it was natural that it end with a whim. Therefore, she looked toward the king outside the door, quietly waiting for his reaction. In the gaze of Demeter, Clitus's hands clenched tightly. His wife's reaction made him realize something. He even pressed his hand on the long sword at his side for a moment, but in the end, the king still put his hand down. He knelt on one knee, by the queen's side. Then, with a slightly trembling voice, he expressed his utmost loyalty to the deity before him. Quote. Thank you for your boon, goddess. If this is your decision, then it must be his best fate. Very well. Nodding her head, as the fury was vented, Demeter's emotions also began to calm. Looking at the king before her, she could sense his pain and resentment, but the goddess did not care. Not every mortal was as powerful as the one who swung a sword at the divine child on the day of the Great Flood. Besides, even that human was facing only a demigod, and against a being like Triton, even one who was not adept at fighting, the goddess could easily erase. So at this moment, a hint of pity arose in Demeter's heart. Having just caused the outcome, she now felt reluctant. This seemed contradictory, but it was actually not. The human heart is always complex, and the deities of chaos, in this regard, are no different from humans. Standing in the room, Demeter thought of many things. The moment she first came to the city and was warmly received by the king's daughters, the first time she saw Mnemosyne and remembered her daughter with a heavy heart, being amused by an old servant's joke in the palace, and the pleasant days she had spent in Eros. Looking at the queen lying on the ground, who had already lost hope and voice, a sense of condescending benevolence rose from Demeter's heart. No matter what, she was but a mortal. Her ignorance was the reason she had disturbed Demeter, and now, she had paid the price for it. So, looking at the king before her, Demeter slowly began to speak. Your queen has disturbed me, mortal king, but in my benevolence, I forgive her transgressions. And now that the misdeed is over, your merits should not be erased. Starting from tomorrow, send your other son to me. Though your second son's fate is not to be with the gods, to your eldest, I shall still bestow the glory closest to that of a deity. Quote. His blood seemed to turn icy cold, and Clitus opened his mouth but could not find the words to speak. He did not know what Demeter truly intended this time, or if she actually meant to give a reward. He only thought he was about to lose another child. But in the end, the king simply bowed his head slightly. Your Highness, thank you for your boon. Waving her hand, Demeter turned away. The royal christening had been tiring, and everything that followed had worn out the goddess even more. She walked toward the inside of the house and said faintly to the two behind her. Let's call it a day. I'm tired, you may leave. Quote. Yes, Your Highness. With a soft reply, the king took the hand of his dazed wife and silently left the room. He was going to bury his child, who had come into this world for only a spring and fall. The underworld. Fields of truth. Unlike the surface world, compared to the past visits, the core of the underworld had become somewhat livelier. In recent years, the mortal realm's winters have grown more severe, resulting in the deaths of many mortals. Moreover, due to the rapid and rampant propagation of humans, the vast majority of them actually held little faith in the gods. Thus, in accordance with the covenant made with the gods above, the bones of a great number of mortals arrived in the underworld. The losses originally caused by Gaia were quickly replenished, and even exceeded. At this moment, within the divine palace of the underworld, Hades sat quietly on his throne, enjoying the rare delicacies of the bleak underworld, and by his side sat Persephone. Demeter's worries were justified. Her daughter had inherited her beauty and had even surpassed her. However, contrary to many deities' expectations, this goddess, who had been in the underworld for more than 100 years, showed no signs of coercion. In fact, she seemed to be in quite a good mood. And the reason for her good mood was naturally the cold winters that afflicted the world above. All of a sudden, the ruler on the throne uttered a light exclamation. He put down the cup in his hand and looked upward. Yet he could not see through the layers of earth. He merely sensed something faintly, a faithless newcomer in death. But to Hades' surprise, the presence was not quite like that of a deity, and probably not much like a mortal either. By his side, Persephone was not at all surprised by this. She casually tasted a piece of fruit, then asked, "What is it? Has another powerful mortal passed away? Then you go. As for dealing with the body, I have no interest in it." See 434 Chapter 116 The Awakening Mother of Demons. In the divine palace of Hades, Persephone and Hades were seated opposite each other. She knew the reason Hades looked up, but indeed, she was not very interested in it. For just like other deities from the surface, this goddess of the seeds did not take much liking to wraiths exuding an aura of death. As for why Hades was so attentive to this, it was quite understandable. The stronger the life was when alive, the more powerful it would be after death, and the piety generated from such a life was often exceptionally astonishing. The determination of the purity of faith lay in piety, but what determined the quantity was the strength of the life itself. For innately immortal deities, whether the faith was pure didn't have much of an impact. Therefore, what truly captured the gods' attention was merely the amount. Perhaps for other divinities of Olympus, they wouldn't care too much about those few powerful individuals. After all, humans were still in a state of barbaric growth, and if it weren't for the winter brought by Demeter, it's likely that the number of mortals would still be increasing. So instead of focusing on those powerful beings, it would be better to increase the numbers. Faith is hard to coerce, mortal lives are very limited, and casting a wide net is the only hard truth. But Hades was different. The lifespan of a wraith depends on the soul. The more potent, the longer it lasts. Without divine bloodlines, the legendary individuals among the fourth generation of human history could scarcely live twice or thrice the lifespan of ordinary people. Still, those of a similar rank among the wraiths could easily survive for thousands of years. This made individual strength quite cost-effective. Moreover, Hades had had enough of those wraiths who liked to worship the nether moon. These skeletons and souls seemed to have a natural affinity for the being that granted them rebirth. So, given any possibility, Hades would rather nurture those unique and powerful beings separately, using his divine power to create a similar environment and grant them new life. This method indeed avoided a lot of trouble. The only downside was that this task itself was not easy. Without the corresponding authority, even though the goddess of the nether moon hadn't prevented the birth of unclaimed magic power from the source, Hades still needed to use a tremendous amount of energy to achieve the same thing. However, if it was just a small number, Hades felt he could accept that. After all, he only needed to pay attention to those subordinates worthy of his notice. As for the rest, wraiths are different from the living after all. These beings who had died once not only lacked so many desires, but Hades also didn't rely on worship to draw faith. Over the years, he had confirmed his conjecture. As Hades, the reverence for his authority and the rules established under this authority from those lives born in the underworld was a form of faith in him. So, whenever he had a chance, Hades would personally visit the mortal realm. But this time, faced with Perse's question, Hades merely shook his head. It is indeed a powerful aura, but it's not immortal, so I must see for myself. And besides, it seems to have some connection to you. Recalling that fleeting aura, Hades felt somewhat uncertain. It was a sensation tainted with divine aura, and even that breath felt familiar. That was Demeter. Thinking this, as if he finally made a decision, he looked towards the goddess beside him. So many years had passed, and he could now be sure that even if she wasn't the perfect choice, she was the one he needed. If so, there was no need to hesitate anymore. Perse. Although the arrival of winter is indeed a good thing, the gods will not tolerate it forever. One day, they will no longer bear the reduction of humanity, and at your mother's request, they will unite to pressure me to let you return to the mortal realm. But I do not want to go back, she said indifferently, searching on the table and eating another fruit. I can explain to my mother, she will understand me. Perhaps. But whether she understands you or not, Zeus will definitely not understand me. Hades shook his head, having little hope for this. Hades saw all that King Zeus had done for Demeter. Clearly, even if he wasn't as jumpy as Poseidon and had ventured to the desolate depths, Zeus was still far from at ease with him. It could be just the divine king's subconscious check and balance, or he might have seen something. In any case, Zeus' actions had already vaguely expressed his stance. So this time, Hades decided to act first and seize her to the underworld, then demand that King Zeus fulfill his promise. Otherwise, he was sure that something bizarre would happen in between, and it seemed to be unrelated to the master of Mount Olympus. Enjoy exclusive adventures from Empire. Thinking of this, Hades felt a bit amused. Zeus indeed was the guardian of oaths. He would honor the exact words of an oath. Moreover, in matters outside the oath, he would do even more in the opposite direction. But perhaps it was someone like him who could sit on the throne for longer, if he were human instead of the divine king. King Zeus, truly disgusting. Picking up the handkerchief to dab her moistened fingertips, Persephone raised her head. Her gaze pierced through the walls of the divine palace, overlooking the vast expanse of the underworld from a higher perspective. See 435 Chapter 116 The Awakening Mother of Demons _2. As a deity of the earth above, she was not very fond of the gloomy underworld. However, unlike before, there was no longer a mother forcibly demanding that she must stay in the narrow valley. She could freely reside in this vast land, even if it was still a bit monotonous now. Although reason told Persephone that it was Demeter's decision to protect her, she could understand her mother's actions. However, to make a girl filled with curiosity about everything live in isolation and remain in a secluded valley for a century was torture in itself. Besides, in her view, perhaps her own mother had better ways to protect her instead of hiding in a corner deceiving herself. Therefore, Persephone resented Zeus, who had led to all this, but she was not particularly close to the mother she had only met a few times. She felt like she was just a seed, still buried between crevices and rubble, just like her godhood. That was why she had not told Demeter of her whereabouts. Before, and she had watched as the other caused disasters in the mortal realm. Because she wanted to disgust Zeus, and also hoped to push this goddess who clearly held extraordinary authority. She was also a daughter of Cronus, and all 6 of her siblings were powerful true gods, yet Demeter acted so timidly. Did she not know that the weaker one was, the more they needed to reveal their thorns, to at least make others hesitate when picking the fruit? Fortunately, with her disappearance, her mother finally remembered her authority and learned to protect her through threats rather than escape. At this moment, Persephone felt that her actions were, after all, very right. Some people's nature is such that you need to corner them before they show their threatening side. Without a doubt, her mother was one of these people. If she had acted this way immediately after being forcefully taken by Zeus, the other gods would have long known to give her a bit more respect, even if just on the surface. But thinking of this, the goddess then turned her gaze towards Hades. Demeter might have let the other gods see her in a new light since she had always held that authority, only never mustering the courage before. Persephone, however, did not have that luxury. Her own divine power was truly weak, and no matter how much she bluffed, the outcome would be no different. So all she could count on was this man who had brought her here. So think of a way, Hades. Aren't you the king of the underworld? Zeus is just your younger brother. As his elder, are you only capable of groveling and fawning before him? Looking at her future husband, Persephone sarcastically said, without mincing her words. And in front of her, listening to the goddess's words, Hades was not angry. Or rather, he never got angry over these insignificant things. If it was only to win a temporary victory, I wouldn't have given up competing with Zeus for the throne of the divine king in the first place. Besides, now, the power he has shown is starting to become unclear to me. Enjoy more content from Empire. Shaking his head, his expression somewhat indescribable, Hades once again sipped the nectar in his cup. The resurrected wraiths retain some memories of their mortal lives, so the crafts of the mortal realm have also spread to the underworld. Even the materials became available after Persephone's arrival. Within the fields of truth, the goddess created a garden and used her power to grow various crops from the earth above. Whether it was the fruit they ate now or the nectar, she had planted the materials herself. However, I do not envy him, for I know there is no power gained without cause in this world. The throne of the divine king appears tempting. My grandfather, my father, and even the current Zeus, they gained supreme power for it. But who knows what the cost is? Hey. Persephone scoffed at Hades's words, disregarding them completely. By the time he pays the price, you might already be trained so tame and docile. Big truths anyone can utter, Hades, but the fact remains, Uranus did as he pleased for an epoch, and in front of Cronus, you wouldn't even dare to speak up. State your intentions, or do you want to tell me that you went to all the trouble of bringing me to the underworld, just so I could amuse myself here for 100 years, and then meekly be sent back to Olympus? Unfooled. Perhaps in terms of certain sharpness, Persephone indeed inherited some of her father's traits. Just as she said, if Hades dared to bring her down, he should have a way to make her stay. You're right, I can indeed make you stay here, however, not permanently. After a moment of silence and having made up his mind, there was no need for further hesitation. The years they spent together allowed Hades to understand his future queen more clearly. Although she never knew how to speak politely to him, when she actually set out to do things, she was quite measured. Perhaps, as she herself said, the unkind words were just a cover for inner insecurity. So, facing Persephone's gaze, Hades's expression finally became serious. Silently, that authority belonging to him, half of the underworlds, was summoned, converging towards his palm. The gray and black energies intertwined. As a nexus where the powers of the 4 primordial gods collided, the forces of the underworld were inevitably tinged with aspects of each of them. Weighty, mysterious, and with a twist of order, or rather, the rules within the shadows. 12 crystal clear fruits gradually emerged in Hades's palm, and with their appearance, even the color on Hades's face turned somewhat pale. C 436 Chapter 116 The Awakening Mother of Demons _3. As you can see, in the past 100 years, I have been getting to know you. But now, I feel you might truly be able to become my queen of the underworld. So just as Zeus and Hera do, I am willing to share my authority with you, provided that you are willing to bear the cost. Cost. Staring at the fruit in Hades' palm, Persephone raised an eyebrow. It had been a casual inquiry, she didn't pay much attention after all, because to her, no cost could be worse than returning to Olympus powerless. Compared to that, Even the unnamed fruit in front of her seemed more enticing. She had never seen such a plant before. It seemed it wasn't naturally occurring but rather a manifestation of some kind of authority. But no matter, as the goddess of seeds, just by consuming one, these new plants would spread throughout the underworld from this day on. Yes, a cost. The divine king is the convergence of the laws of the present world, so Hera can share Zeus's authority because, including myself, we are all part of the present world. The underworld is different. With a slight nod, Hades continued his explanation. Your origin is not naturally one with the underworld, which makes it impossible for me to directly make you the queen of the underworld. So Perse, if you wish to share my authority, you must first actively make yourself a part of the underworld. By that time, your power will be like mine, closely linked to the strengths and weaknesses of the underworld. Of course, you are not like me. The symbol of my godhood is naturally a part of the underworld's composition, just as I myself reside here. Hence, I can freely wander to every corner of this world. But if you make the same choice, you will henceforth be bound by the world's laws. And at that time, no one trying to stop you will be able to prevent your return to the embrace of the underworld at the destined times, not even yourself. I understand. Reflective, Persephone briefly pondered before grasping the meaning of Hades' words. And then your purpose is achieved too. When my authority becomes a part of the underworld, wherever I am, the world itself will change accordingly, right? To that, Hades said nothing, but his demeanor said it all. Well then, how many can I eat? Looking once again at the fruit in the hand of the king of the underworld, Persephone repeated her question. At most half, that is the limit you can bear, but I hope you understand that before you eat it, you are still free to decide whether you stay above ground or below. After all, I won't restrain your actions. But, no buts. Interrupting Hades' speech, Persephone took 6 seeds from his hand and swallowed them all at once. Seeds also need a place to germinate, and I think this place is quite nice. There was no sensation at first after the fruit entered her belly. However, soon the goddess felt herself touching something majestic. She was being enveloped, swallowed, merged, and during this process, she also felt a mighty power flowing into her body, gradually coming under her command. This influence was mutual, only because of their different magnitudes, the underworld changed a little, and Persephone changed more. However, this was just right. The underworld after all is not the surface world. A small change is beneficial, but too much would not necessarily be so. The transformation continued, the interaction of laws never ceased. As time passed, at a certain moment, the entire underworld trembled lightly. Something had been fundamentally altered, yet it seemed as though nothing had happened. Only Hades, as the king of the underworld, could clearly feel that under the fields of truth, a weak new life had been born. It was like an ungerminated seed, tiny but hardy and pure. And the moment it emerged, the cycle of the underworld instantly elevated by more than a notch, and even after a surge, it was still slowly strengthening. At the same time, the laws of the present world seemed also to rejoice at this, and their power also tipped some of it down. Gaia noticed this change, but now she had no leisure to attend to it. The other primordial deities also noticed this scene, but upon sensing the familiar atmosphere of the present world, they each turned their gaze away again. The laws responding so directly was essentially confirmation that it was a destined step. Perhaps its process could be changed, but the outcome was always beyond alteration. It was like the birth of the moon and the succession of the divine king, a node of the world's self-improvement, a destined event. Meanwhile, on Mount Olympus, the divine king seemed to sense something as well. However, his active incarnation was unable to identify the source of the problem, and after searching to no avail, he temporarily set aside the strange sensation and called for the wind gods. The matter with Demeter had been dragging on too long. As the divine king, it would not be proper for him to get involved. So he must rely on his loyal servants to make contact. He believed that for such matters, he didn't need to state explicitly, by maintaining an attitude of indifference, they would understand his intentions. This is the authority of the underworld. In the divine palace of the underworld, Persephone, having eaten 6 seeds, opened her eyes. Somehow, her golden hair had turned ashen, her pupils pure black. A faint mist swirled about her, greeting the rebirth of the goddess. C. 437 Chapter 116 The Awakening Mother of Demons _4. Now, am I the queen of the underworld? Stretching languidly, Persephone felt an unprecedented sense of ease as she embraced her new state. The cold sensation emanating from deep within her soul was not only bearable but somehow comforting. Then, turning around, the goddess stared at Hades for a good while. Suddenly, she asked, "So Hades, now that I am your queen, do you wish for me to bear you a prince?" "Gods do not need heirs," was the terse refusal. Silently, Hades clenched his fist, and the remaining 6 fruits returned to his body. Having resolved a long-standing concern, Hades also did not forget another matter he had been planning to attend to. "I'm going to check on that dead soul which has an odd aura. Do you want to come with me?" "You're really no fun," she said, a hint of disappointment in her voice. Yet, over the centuries, Persephone had realized that the underworld's ruler might have had many reasons for seeking a queen, but they did not include the same motives as Zeus. Therefore, the goddess merely waved her hand indifferently to Hades's reaction, then turned and looked playfully toward the back of the temple. There, she sensed a familiar presence. It was also she who had found her own hidden valley that brought the bronze chariot riding Hades to her. Initially, Persephone had been somewhat grateful to her, but that feeling gradually faded. Whenever she was alone with Hades, the nymph seemed to insist on asserting her presence, even going so far as to say annoying things when the goddess was by herself. Like claiming she was the best candidate to be Hades's wife or recounting all she had done for the Dark Lord, warning Persephone not to harbor delusions. Or mocking her heritage and past, along with other nonsense, seemingly forgetting that, no matter her flaws, she was an inherently immortal deity, while the nymph was but dust never heeded by gods. Previously, Persephone was not quite sure how to deal with her, knowing well her divine status, although she never minced her words. However, now the situation was different. So the goddess extended her hand and with a light grasp, the naiad named Minta was caught in her grip. "Wait, Persephone, what are you doing?" Minta, seemingly taken aback by being snatched up so suddenly, had a voice tinged with panic, which quickly turned to confidence. She did not believe Persephone would dare harm her. After all, she had worked for Hades for so many years. Immediately, she began to explain. "Your Majesty Hades, I wasn't trying to eavesdrop on your conversation. I was just coming to bring you." Her voice cut off abruptly. A mere fluctuation of the power in Persephone's hand silenced the nymph's annoying voice forever. Persephone's fingers then closed in a gesture of finality, intending to utterly erase the clueless nuisance. It was then that a pale hand grasped her wrist. "What's the matter? Can't bear to let her go? If so, why didn't you stop me from killing her just now?" Without turning around, the queen of the underworld was certain that Hades had just been fully capable of stopping himself. Yet, at the next moment, the response from the king of the underworld made her burst into laughter. "You'll have to learn to be economical, Perse. From now on, the underworld has a part that belongs to you, too." Releasing his hold, with a casual flick of his hand, Minta's figure began to blur. Soon, what remained in her place was a soul mint plant. Of course, this world had not known mint. Until then, it was newly created by Hades. He believed the plant's unique aroma might serve as a reminder to those who would use it later on. Furthermore, Perse, since you killed her, from today onwards, the tasks that were once hers are now yours to bear. If it weren't for a genuine lack of alternatives, how could Hades have tolerated this self-willed maid? Fortunately, it now seemed that his queen of the underworld was a very capable individual. As his words fell, the king of the underworld turned into light and sped toward the ground. He had already been delayed for quite a time. Watching Hades's retreating back, Persephone gazed for a while before turning around, smiling as she picked up the mint plant and gave a gentle toss. The next moment, countless seeds of mint drifted off in all directions. Reminded of something by the scene, the goddess also conjured the very same nameless fruit that she had previously tasted. "As for you, you shall be called pomegranate." She spoke softly, and thus on that day, 2 new plants came into the world. The underworld gained a queen-wielding authority, and Hades finally reached the limits of what a true god could achieve. The next step would be the nearly insurmountable chasm of the heavens. As for the deceased naiad, aside from the 2 deities present, much like the mint that would spread across the world, no one remembered her name. Outside the world, Tartarus. Centuries passed in the outside world, but here, tens of thousands of years hurried by. Under chaotic time, everything was so erratic. However, since the start of the third epoch, several abnormalities had altered this place, allowing the originally orderless abyss to undergo curious transformations. Layer upon layer of space stretched outward, dissecting the merged realm into distinct planes, and even when observing its spatial structure, it bore some resemblance to the 9 hells. However, it was far more inhospitable here, and the division of its layers lacked any discernible order. Yet, there was one aspect in which even the 9 hells could not compare: the sheer number of hierarchical levels. Beneath Tartarus, vastness, thousands upon thousands of dimensions, both large and small, were birthed. In its unique set of rules, no one knew exactly how many planes existed within because the innate chaos of the abyss might never have paid any heed to such details. And under such circumstances, even if a layer born from chaos was nowhere near as powerful as the nine hells, this simple multiplication in quantity could not, like the layers of hell, bring any significant reinforcement to the world's inner cycle. But in the face of such an immense accumulation of quantities, it still displayed another kind of beauty. Regardless, when compared to the complete abyss, the nine hells were much weaker. After all, as the main portion outside the world, Tartarus still possessed power that even the current Laine was no match for. For hell to close this gap was likely to take an entire era. Of course, these newly formed layers did not harbor life, as at present, in the entire abyss, there were only 7 beings that truly qualified as living. And just at the very bottom of these million layers, already at the nadir of all worlds, within a void of chaotic hues, 6 towering figures of various appearances floated there. Before them, an indescribable colossal entity bobbed up and down, showing signs of waking up at last. She had intended to sleep a bit longer, but the upheavals in the underworld had startled all the primordial gods, naturally including the abyss. As the beginning of life in the abyss, she, too, was affected. Thus, a consciousness that had slumbered for an era slowly stirred, bringing with it the throbbing power of Tartarus. C. 438 to 117 Demon Gods. An indescribable core of the abyss. When the transformation of the underworld was complete, its influence was also transmitted here in another manner. Something throbbed, followed by a slight shake of the titanic figure at the core of Tartarus. Perhaps because she had slept for too long, her own power had undergone too drastic a transformation in this process, such that even though she was stimulated, her consciousness awakened slowly. As for the 6 distinct figures, they guarded around their mother, but their consciousness was actually not complete. Or rather, before Moya awoke, they were meant to remain as they were, for the mother of demons was truly the first life that should appear in the abyss. Time slowly passed, and the consciousness within that immense body became ever more active. At some moment, she finally regained a bit of her capacity to think, allowing the eyes on her body to also gradually open. The surroundings were suddenly reflected in her gaze. It's noisy. Her consciousness was adrift in nothingness, surrounded by darkness without borders. Something was constantly changing her, yet she didn't have a clearer sense of reality in her sleep. She didn't know how much time had passed, as there was no concept of time in sleep. It was only that strange fluctuation that had just occurred that finally startled this confused soul awake. But her consciousness had only awakened a little, not enough to freely control her own body and power, and even less to bear the memory of the past and logical thinking. For the moment she had forgotten why she was there, even where here was, and had even forgotten who she was. Millions of years blurred everything, and when it all ended, Moya, having just awakened from her slumber, was a bit out of sorts. Her somewhat muddled consciousness did not recall everything immediately. She was simply observing her surroundings instinctively, the twisted and bizarre place. Even without recalling the various events of the past, Moya still felt that the scenery before her eyes was probably somewhat different from where she used to live. Stars twinkled above, remnants of the creation of the world, impurities that were difficult for the world to digest, and now they form layers upon layers of projections of the abyssal dimensions. A chaotic sea churned below, the true bottom of all worlds, and also the most primordial existence of abyss Tartarus. Looking at it, a feeling of kinship mixed with rejection arose from the depths of Moya's heart. The familiarity came from the origin of her body, and the rejection from the memories in her subconscious. The ancient titans inherently did not like these, but no matter what, after thinking briefly to no avail, she let it go, because Moya's attention was quickly drawn to something even more tangible around her. Those were the 6 immeasurable colossal entities, so her subconscious told her. But Moya's currently vague thoughts were a bit confused because she couldn't feel where they were big at all. Greatness and smallness are defined by reference, but at the moment in the core of Tartarus, there was only Moya and these 6 entities. Compared to her, these demon gods could not be considered large in any way. And they don't seem to have the same consciousness as I do. It seemed she discovered something. Moya was a bit surprised, and then the answer suddenly emerged in her mind. It seemed that when it involved certain things, she didn't need to think to know the answer. Sensing the incomprehensibly understood information, Moya realized the situation in an instant. Before she awoke, there would be no second fully conscious being in the abyss. She was a special being, not only as the first life of the abyss, but also because of certain innate traits she possessed. She was immortal, but they were not. Therefore, even if the demon god's gestation was complete, it remained halted due to Moya's slumber. I am special, that's nice. Having found the answer, Moya's consciousness again let go of the doubts, a touch of joy rising in her heart, and then she began to observe these 6 fellows more meticulously. After all, they were the only beings around. So Moya opened her eyes, using her body and consciousness to examine their appearance and power in turn. Each of them was different, and the one closest to Moya looked like a huge insect. Its bloated body was covered with large and small branches, and in the position of the head, a huge human face was drawn, which added to its sense of horror. As before, when Moya saw it, the information about this life form came to mind. It was the first demon god born in Tartarus, symbolizing the growth and change of life's flesh within the abyss. Of course, this was her, the firstborn of the mother of demons. So I am the mother of demons. Then what is a demon? Her hazy mind pondered for a moment, then gave up thinking once more. Moya continued to observe the other 5 entities. The second closest to her was a giant insect, or more precisely, something like an enlarged moth, only it was clearly different from those frail creatures. The transparent wings were adorned with countless eyes, not the compound eyes of insects, but the eyes of normal animals. Dense specks covered them. Even without considering the power within, this sight alone could cause someone with trypophobia to become so frightened as to lose their composure. C 439 to 117 Demon Gods _2. However, observing this scene, Moya had no reaction because the aura emanating from the mother of demons wasn't as potent as that of the other 5. Under that inexplicable knowledge, ability, Moya knew it should symbolize the chaotic spirit of life in the abyss, but for some reason, the power of the demon god before her seemed somewhat vague to the mother of demons' perception. It doesn't matter, it has nothing to do with me. With a slight fluctuation of consciousness, Moya's attention shifted once more. The third one she looked at appeared to be normal, at least Moya felt her subconscious was somewhat quieter and no longer so vehemently resistant. It was a titan with 3 heads and 8 arms. To the sensory abilities of the mother of demons, each of its heads possessed different powers. One slowly corroded everything, another efficiently brought ruin to all spirits, and the final, central head could enhance itself by absorbing the power from its slaughters. Every head had its distinct attributes, but their commonality was that they all symbolized the abyss's destruction of order. Nothing special. Moya continued looking backward, the 4th and 5th ones catching her gaze simultaneously. One had dark red skin and robust limbs, with enormous flesh wings and long horns, its body engulfed in unceasing flames. The other was covered in frost and fog, its form concealed beneath, difficult to discern. That inexplicable intuition told Moya that, just like the birth of the 3rd demon god was influenced by some foreign object that appeared in the abyss, these 2 demon gods were similarly affected. One had received power from some flame kingdom, the other had merged with the essence expelled from a foggy realm. These 2 powers endowed them with abilities beyond mere abyssal traits, granting them such unique capabilities. Interesting. And the last one. Moya's gaze moved to the final demon god. Compared to the previous 5, the entity hiding at the end did not possess its body and form. It was a mass of ever-changing shadows, at times leaping, at other times silent. It seemed different from the first 5, but as curiosity arose in her heart, Moya understood once more the nature of its powers. It was of chaos and shadow, a manifestation of the imbalance in chaos's power. In this world where darkness far outweighed light, it symbolized the abyss's shadow. These are 6 peculiar fellows, as nauseating as the hecatonkires. An inexplicable train of thought surfaced in Moya's mind, but although she did not suddenly know something this time, the mother of demons had no intention of pondering. Although she did not remember what the hecatonkires were, it must be a similar entity she had once encountered. But come to think of it. So, what do I look like? This time it wasn't a thought but an actual voice. Even if Moya herself was unclear where her voice-producing organs were located, she had indeed spoken. The imagery of the 6 demon gods finally piqued the curiosity of the mother of demons. She wanted to see what she looked like, but upon trying, she discovered that she couldn't do so. Consciousness can't observe itself, or at least the instinct-driven Moya couldn't manage to. Realizing this, she felt somewhat dejected. Then let's wait for them to awaken. When they awake, I'll have them tell me what I look like. Not remaining dejected for long, Moya perked up again, as she had noticed that as she awakened, those 6 demons surrounding her were also finally about to acquire their full consciousness. Just as she had observed them, she decided to let them articulate her appearance. And so, as she waited, time slowly drifted by. The distorted chronology of the abyss had no standard measure, and Moya didn't know how long she had waited. Until at some moment, she suddenly realized that the weakest, and most peculiar, demon god showed signs of awakening. Its wings' myriad eyes trembled as if about to open at any moment. Thus, Moya laboriously shifted herself before it. What do I look like? At that instant, Moya spoke again, sensing that the other's consciousness had become whole. And in the next moment following her inquiry, the demon god's eyes also opened instantaneously. A million beams of light shot forth, releasing its power outward, not out of intent but as a sign of the demon god's yet unlearned control. They didn't need control, those without moral concepts would not mind if they inadvertently harmed others. Just like Moya before, the newly born demon god instinctively scanned its surroundings, its many eyes being the perfect tool. And the first thing it beheld was its creator who had nourished it, the mother of all demons of the abyss. Whoosh! A million eyes closed in an instant, followed by the flow of blood-colored liquid from the eyelids. Across from the demon god, Moya didn't even realize what had just occurred. What's wrong? She asked. Receiving no response, Moya only saw the other's wings vibrating, retreating backward. She was about to question this oddly behaving fellow, but in the next moment, the mother of demons was drawn to the blood flowing in the void. It was like a mirror, reflecting her appearance. Staring at the reflection in the liquid, Moya was stunned for a moment. The beauty, seen by the conscious mind, clashed with the utmost ugliness, comprehended by the subconscious, striking her consciousness with intensity. In an instant, this extremely strong sensory shock suddenly awakened Moya's memory, and she finally remembered who she was. However, at that moment, she wished she had never remembered. I am Mnemosyne. I am the goddess of titans. I am the god of script and innate language. I am the mother of demons. Single quote. Ah! A piercing scream echoed through the abyss, violent power shaking the world. The once titan deity finally remembered everything, but the current outcome was more than she could bear. She had come to Tartarus seeking power, and indeed she had gotten what she wanted. However, the cost was the permanent loss of everything about herself apart from that power. The abyss trembled. The newly born demon gods had not yet fully awakened when they were sent flying by Moya's power. After venting her rage, the mother of demons looked up at the very top, where the interface between the abyss and the present world lay, the gateway to the underworld. Behind that was the source of everything. Laine. Moya's succinct syllables contained anger that could not be washed away by all the waters of the 4 seas. If it weren't for that being who had stolen her godhood, how could she have ended up like this today? There were others too. Those beings that refused to help her, they all deserved to die. She wanted to go out, to let all life in the present world taste despair and pain, but before she could start, that enlightening power from before sent another will her way, stopping her actions. Single quote. Hell, another thief. Single quote. Single quote. Fine, then I will deal with you first, before I take care of the rest. In that moment, Moya profoundly understood the abyss. She knew the anger of having one's power taken away, even though Tartarus actually didn't feel anger. So she turned around, her gaze following some guidance, and saw the world hidden behind the temporal barrier. It was very similar to the former material realm, orderly and harmonious. Even now, Moya preferred such places. But she was different now, so the mother of demons shrieked again, summoning those demon gods she had just shaken out. Having sensed the will of the abyss, in this moment, she only wanted to bring total destruction to this world. The 9 hells, central courtyard. 2 suns shone from above, illuminating the figure on the floating island. The consciousness of the world serpent was there, alongside the master of the 9 hells, observing everything outside. 6 demon gods, the mother of demons, neither they nor the abyss seemed intent on concealing their tracks at this moment. She seems to be calling your name. Laine, listen, that's quite a deep grudge. Next to the familiar table and chairs, Asmodeus drank a cup of tea. However, unlike his casual tone, his facial expression was extremely serious. C 440 to 118a small, sacrifice. Seated on the floating island in the courtyard, Laine and Asmodeus faced each other. For them, Everything outside of hell was clearly visible, including Moya's piercing screams. However, the reverse was not true. The mother of demons could not see what was happening inside the 9 hells. This was not due to a power disparity between the two sides. In reality, the abyss held the true advantage in terms of power. The fundamental reason was that Tartarus lacked its own subjective consciousness. It didn't know to block prying eyes, so in hell, beings with divine power could see everything outside without hindrance. And since Tartarus couldn't do two things at the same time, even as it was nurturing the mother of demons and the 6 demon gods, it remained oblivious to the thief who had entered its body unannounced. As a result, for a considerable length of time in the past, the demons of hell could pass through the abyss to the mortal world, while the 9 hells ceaselessly siphoned the power that was meant for nurturing the demon gods. Nevertheless, Asmodeus was well aware that this situation likely wouldn't last much longer. The abyss had finally birthed its own life, and when Moya awoke, hell's extraction of its origin was forcibly halted. And with the last demon god opening its eyes, Tartarus finally reacted to the foreign body within it. The chaotic sea boiled in response, and countless layers of the realm shook. It sent guidance to Moya and the demon gods, lending its power to the mother of demons, and even integrated its towering malice over hell in an attempt to first envelop this foreign body, and then to have its own bread life shatter it. But a being without wisdom is such that it doesn't know how to conceal its intentions or prioritize its actions. So when the changes in the abyss were detected, in the concept of space and time, the position of the 9 hells began to surface. The entrance to the first layer of hell was originally near the place where Moya was nurtured, drawing power continuously from Tartarus. But now, it moved past layer after layer of the abyss, only slowing down as it reached the outermost layer. Even from another perspective, parts of the 9 hells had already extended beyond the abyss, with only a very small area remaining intertwined with it. But that was as far as it could go, for the connection between hell and the abyss could not be severed, they were one entity. Thus, Asmodeus wasn't trying to escape anything, he merely needed a window that connected to the mortal world rather than being locked inside by Tartarus. This was destined to be a protracted war, and even if victory came this time, the absolute disparity in power between the two sides would be difficult to change. Thus, the connection to the outside could not be cut off. Only then would the 9 hells have a chance to win the ultimate victory. So Laine, how did the spirit realm manage it? From the past until now, why have you never been treated by the mortal world in the same way? There was no apparent change in his appearance. Asmodeus still seemed very normal, but only he knew the terrible pressure he was facing at the moment. As heavy as mountains, as vast as the ocean, faced with the abyss that finally had its hands free, hell could only navigate through the crevices at this moment, utterly incapable of resistance. Therefore, right from the beginning, Asmodeus was destined not to intervene in this battle. The pressure from the abyss exhausted him, and had the other side been conscious, the war could have been declared over before it even began. This was not surprising and still within the expectations of the Lord of the 9 hells. But if this was the case for him, the spirit realm from before should have been similarly affected. Hence, the fact that Laine had not encountered the same fate might indicate that he possessed some special means of dealing with it. If possible, Asmodeus would prefer not to use the method they had previously agreed upon to deal with his first confrontation with the abyss. Don't overthink it. You can't do it because although you were once the god of time and space, when it comes to the true heights of the temporal domain, you have actually never touched it. Even when the spirit realm was just born, as long as I didn't want to, the primordial gods couldn't lock onto me, nor could the mortal world detect me. Nyx once thought she could because she could use the authority of destiny to fix the fate of the spirit realm, but she didn't know that even if the mortal world gave her all the source power of time and space, she still couldn't touch the spirit realm's temporal essence. As for the reason, Laine gently tapped his fingers on the tabletop, not even fully clear himself about the subtle temporal divinity that came with his soul, but undoubtedly, its essence coexisted with the world. It was this power that allowed him to resist the nothingness outside the world to a certain extent and to prevent any being from touching it while the spirit realm was closed. As for the reason, it's probably innate. Being one of the most ancient deities, I've always had to have that little something special. He explained casually, but Laine had already mentioned similar content once before. He also understood that Asmodeus wasn't trying to probe for any secrets, but just wanted to express doubts about the viability of their original plan. So Laine didn't mind repeating it, giving him a bit of encouragement along the way. Backquote, backquote, backquote.